When I was 18, I worked at a local coffee shop in my hometown. I worked there often, picking up shifts and closing 6 nights a week. I had lots of regulars and a lot of randoms as well. Other than maybe a few awkward people, I never really had a problem with a customer though, being inappropriate or out of hand. This night had already been really stressful for me, as it was Halloween. I was a little bit bummed out to be closing while my friends were all out and about. Still, I had plans to go to a house that my friends had rented right down the street after work, with some pastries and Red Bull as well, so I didn't really mind that much. It was around 9:45 and I was already ready to close right at 10. It had been dead ever since 8, and all I had to do was a final register count. Everything had already been cleaned, and I was reading a book to pass the time, trying not to just count the clock. Our counter, by the way, was like a bar counter, long with the register near the door at the closed end, and with the one far end open for us to go in and out of right near the door to our back room. This man walked through the front door, and he looked to be about his mid-20s. He was black and had a big hoodie on, and was wearing sweatpants that sagged down. I could see the waistbands of 2 different pairs of gym shorts underneath. I'm a young woman, but I don't really have a particular fear of people, so I didn't really bat an eyelash when he walked in with one hand in his pocket, and the other in the pocket of one of his pairs of gym shorts. People wear clothes like that and carry themselves that way all the time, at least where I live, so with no concern at all, I greeted him and asked him how he was, and what he was thinking of ordering. The man took his time responding, but wasn't really looking at the menu or at our chalkboard with our seasonal drink offers. He was looking at the front door instead. He took about a minute standing there, then turned to me and asked my name. Customers often do this to make small talk, so I told him and asked again what he was looking to order. He began to ask more questions though about me and my job. He asked me if I liked it. I responded thinking maybe he wanted a job application or something, and gave him a very short version of what it was like to work there. It was almost 9:50 at this point and I kept on checking my phone. I just wanted to make this guy's drink so I could clean up again and go meet my friends. The man nodded, saying he thought I liked my job. I thought that was quite a strange thing to say, but again, I didn't really think too much of it. I agreed, and then he started to ask about the shifts I worked. I figured he had sympathy that it was Halloween, so I gave him a vague answer. Then he asked why I didn't work on Thursdays. My heart jumped. I didn't see that one coming. I struggled to respond, and he continued and asked if Sunday mornings were better than Wednesday nights. At this point, I broke into nervous laughter and smiles, asking him if he was looking to work for the coffee shop or something. We did need the help at the time. He stopped smiling at this point though. His hand in the hoodie pocket made a very abrupt move to the inside pair of gym shorts. Basically, he was grabbing himself. He didn't quite reach all the way though. I felt like I was going to pass out or something. I told him to order or leave, as the end of the business day was almost there. I would need to close up soon. At this point, I grabbed my cell phone and kept it in my hand, thinking how could I dial 911 and not have him begin to molest himself in front of me or whatever he planned on doing. He leaned over the counter and began to bombard me with more questions. He asked me where I lived, if I had a boyfriend, what my plans were that night. I was trying hard not to show how worried I was, and did my best to lie through some more vague answers. I hoped he would just go away if I didn't show a reaction. He began to move away from the register, still leaning on the counter, hands in pants, toward the open end of the bar. Clutching my phone, I asked him what he wanted, and for some reason he stopped. He stood up and looked toward the front door, then turned to look at the clock behind me. At this point, I took the chance to start writing a text message to my friend. If I'm not at your place in 10 minutes, call the police. He caught me sending the text and asked me who I was talking to. I told him it was my boyfriend, and his face became something I'll never forget. His eyes blazed, and he stood still as stone. He calmly told me to throw my cell phone across the floor, specifically telling me to throw it through the drive-thru. After that, he began to scream. making his way again down the counter. He asked me how I could possibly have a boyfriend when he had been watching me at work for the last 2 months every day. He'd never seen a man drop me off or pick me up at work. He pointed to the side of the building I had parked on even, and said he knew I parked my blue Toyota there earlier, and told me not to lie to him. I asked him to leave and started to cry. He began to describe my work shifts to a T. When I came in, when I left, even how I smoked across the street on every break. He told me that he knew I only drank the Diet Coke we sold, and that I always cranked my music up whenever I started my car. At that point, he pulled a small gun out of his gym shorts and waved it around. He said that I was stupid to lie to him, that he knew everything. He was going between enraged and laughing, as if he couldn't believe I didn't want to talk to him, or finding it funny that I was scared. I offered him all the money in the register, and he laughed again, like hysterically. Then he just suddenly went still. "I'm not here for any money, Marina, and I'm not here for a job either. I think you know what I'm here for." I was sobbing now. That either made him frustrated or sympathetic. He began to tell me I just needed to calm down. He was just really excited to finally meet me in person. He still had one hand down near his dick and began to fondle himself, holding the gun with the other. I asked him again to please leave. When he didn't move, I asked him what I'd ever done to him and why this was happening. He told me it was simply because I was really pretty. He was continuing to talk when all of a sudden my friend walked through the door with a big group of guys in tow. There were 5 altogether, all in a metal band, so they were a pretty distinct group. The man quickly slipped his gun into his hoodie pocket, so quickly that only 2 of my friends noticed it. He bolted for the door, pushing past my friends, and disappeared into the night. I threw up as soon as he was gone, and 2 of my friends ran out after him. They didn't gain on him enough though and didn't see where he'd gone to. I quit my job the next day and called the police. There was never any follow-up, and I still wonder about what the fuck did or didn't happen to me that night. This incident happened to me last year on Halloween. My little brother and I were home alone since our parents had gone out to a Halloween party. They had tasked us with the responsibility of handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters. This kind of bummed my brother and I out though, because we had made plans to go trick-or-treating with a few friends of ours. Our parents told us we were too old to still be trick-or-treating, and we could instead invite our friends over to our house and hang out there. Unfortunately, my friends declined my invitation to come over because they still wanted to go out to trick-or-treat. That meant I was home alone with my brother handing out candy all night long. Actually, a lot of people stopped by our house, and by 10 p.m. almost everything was cleaned out. My brother and I decided we'd just eat the rest ourselves. We were sitting on the couch watching a scary movie and stuffing ourselves with candy, when there was another knock at the door. I stormed off the couch wondering who the hell would be knocking at our door this late. I assumed it must just be some late-night trick-or-treaters this time. Even if that was the case though, I had turned the porch light and Halloween decorations off, which should have been a dead giveaway we were out of candy or were not home. At this point, I wondered if it was possibly my parents. Being cautious though, I looked through the peephole, only to see a very suspicious-looking man standing on our front porch. He was wearing a black hoodie, with the hood completely covering his face. The only detail I could make out was that he appeared to have a beard and dry, crusty lips. There was no way this guy was a trick-or-treater. He wasn't in a costume, and he was way too old to be trick-or-treating alone. His hands were stuffed into the front pocket of his hoodie, and he looked extremely thin. Every single red flag went off in my head about this guy. There was no way in hell I was going to open that door. Still looking through the peephole, I watched as he knocked on the door again. He seemed almost desperate for us to open it and was actually shaking a bit in place. It wasn't cold outside, definitely not cold enough to be trembling. This was really giving me a bad vibe, and I wanted to get rid of this guy as soon as possible. "We're out of candy already. I shouted to him through the door. I watched as a smile slowly spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile either. "Are you alone in there?" the man asked in an almost mocking voice. His voice was very dry and raspy. "Hey, should I call the police?" my little brother asked me quietly, gripping his cell phone. The man let out a low grumble as if he was disappointed and said, "Sounds like you're not alone in there." I continued to watch him through the peephole. His hands were still wedged tightly in his pocket, and he was shaking even more. At this point, I began to consider whether or not the man was armed. I decided to take action and spoke to him in the most intimidating voice I could. "Get the fuck away from my house or I'll call the police!" I shouted. His smile faded immediately, and he bared his teeth like a dog. His teeth were piss yellow. I concluded he must be some homeless crackhead or something. He had this look of fury plastered on his face. Fortunately, he left without trying to break in, probably because he knew I was not fucking around with him. I didn't stop watching him through the peephole until I saw him completely move off our property. My brother and I breathed a sigh of relief and decided not to call the police. My brother and I were a bit paranoid after this though, and watched TV and the streets until our parents came home. We didn't tell them about the man because he hadn't really tried to harm us. Now when I think back on this though, I wish we had called the police, because maybe we could have been able to prevent a murder that night. You see, the next day we found out that the elderly woman who lived a few houses down from us had been brutally murdered. Her neighbor had found her lying on her front porch, covered in blood, stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck. My brother and I knew immediately who had done this and told the police everything we knew. Unfortunately, they couldn't do much with the information we had given, since the man's face had been mostly covered. They went on the hunt for this guy but never caught him in the end. I blame myself for that poor old lady's murder because we could have prevented it from happening just by calling the police. I think the most disturbing thing of all, though, is the fact that he did not take anything from the old lady's house. Her house had been left completely untouched. He could have gone in and taken whatever he wanted since her door was wide open. This means that night he just wanted to kill. That was his only intention. He didn't want money or jewelry or candy. He only had the urge to murder. I love staying up late. Watching TV until 3 a.m. is my bread and butter. Suffice to say, this is a usual thing for me when I'm home alone. With my dad going away for work every 2 weeks and coming home for one, it was very easy for me to get away with it while I was still in school. For context, I lived with just my dad, as my mom had passed away from cancer when I was only 12. I wasn't completely alone though. I had a tuxedo cat with the most fitting of monikers, Tuxedo. I'd had him since I'd turned 16, and he's kept me company during the many long Canadian winter nights when I was by myself. His two favorite places to sit were the small red couch on the right side of the TV and the small table that was placed in front of the large living room window. I usually occupied the big red couch right in front of the television. One more important thing to note is that my dad always insisted I close the curtains on the large living room window when it became nighttime. To him, he thought it was dangerous to let people see into the house. It could possibly tempt them to break in. In my mind though, I always figured no one would be dumb enough to break into a house with all the lights on instead of a house with nobody in it. I usually just left them open the entire 2 weeks he was away, because I was too lazy to close them. On this particular night, I was watching a documentary. I think it was about some couple being held hostage somewhere in Australia or something. These certain types of documentaries would be on very late, which wasn't a problem for 18-year-old me in the slightest. Tuxedo obviously felt a bit differently though, as he had chosen to gaze wistfully outside the living room window instead. As it had just entered commercial break, Tuxedo started giving these soft cries as his eyes were staring in the direction of the front door, which was on the left side of that window. He'd usually only do this if he saw someone outside at the door, which was more commonly done during the day than during the night for obvious reasons. In fact, it was actually very out of the ordinary for it to happen so late at night. At first, I assumed it might have been an outdoor cat or perhaps a wild rabbit by the door, but I could tell Tuxedo's wail was especially worrisome. I decided to check out what it was for myself. Here's the layout of my front door entrance. Tuxedo and I were on the top floor, but the entrance was at a lower level that was between the top floor and the basement. There was a small staircase that went down from the top floor toward the front door, and a second smaller staircase that went down further away from that door to the basement. I'm standing at the top of the staircase, about to go down and open the door to see for myself, when I spot a large shadowed figure in the frosted glass of the front door. I very nearly collapsed to the ground when I saw this. It was definitely not my dad, and 11 p.m. at night it was certainly not something I wanted to see. I could tell whoever this was had something in the door and was trying to pry it open. At that moment, something came over me that I can't quite explain. It might have been the fact that I knew I had no one in the house to help me, or perhaps the fact that I felt an urgency to protect Tuxedo from this intruder. I grabbed my cell phone off the arm of the couch and threw on the lights over the front door. The shadowed figure was now fully visible and clearly startled as our eyes met through the frosted glass. His face was displayed in a jagged reflection. "Leave now! I'm calling the police! Get out of here!" I didn't even get to finish before he was dashing off across my yard and into a car just across the street. Before I could even tell the make or model, let alone the license plate, he was already gone. All that remained was a crude crowbar on the front step. Now, it's up for debate what that man was at my house for. I certainly didn't recognize him in the first few seconds I looked at him. While this definitely shattered my imagined immunity from danger if the lights were still on, part of me wonders if he might have still attacked if I wasn't awake that night. One thing is for sure though, Tuxedo saved my life. I don't even want to imagine what might have happened if he hadn't been looking out the window at that very moment. This took place in 2013. After graduating college, I was about to embark on a summer-long road trip that I had been planning for over a year now. At the very last minute, my friends bailed on me, but being the adventurous sort, I decided not to let that stop me. I packed up my guitar and headed off on my way. This is how I came to be a 26-year-old girl road tripping it across the country on my own. Since I was very poor, I was camping in national forests or rest stops and living out of a borrowed minivan. All was going quite well actually, and I was having the time of my life. A few months in though, I had made it to California and was traveling around the Vallejo/San Francisco area. One night, I was looking for a new place to camp out and found myself on a Bay Area highway, wrought with some very unusual detours. Because the detours were confusing and very poorly marked, I found myself driving through this small town, uncertain if I was even still following the detour or not. It was about 9 p.m., but since it was a small town, no one seemed to be out and about to ask directions from. I tried to use my phone, but the signal was very crummy, and my phone sucked to begin with anyway. "Ah, damn figures," I mumbled and threw my useless phone onto the passenger seat. It seemed I was now heading out of town and into some kind of warehouse district. I could see the highway up ahead in the distance, so I decided to head towards it. The single road I was on led me through rows of factories, but there was nowhere to turn off. Still though, it was headed toward the highway, so I kept on going. I passed by a large old car in the parking lot of a factory. As I passed by, this person switched their headlights on and pulled out behind me. I honestly didn't think anything of this. I figured the poor guy must be lost too, and followed me thinking I knew where I was going. I continued on for a while, with this person still right on my tail. I finally reached where the highway passed over the road. Much to my dismay, I turned a corner into a gravel lot of sorts. that dead-ended into a fence right underneath the highway. It seemed there was no way to actually get on. This is where it gets even more creepy. The gravel area was about 2 lanes wide, but the large car pulled up right behind me, directly across the middle, so I could not get around him. This raised an immediate red flag. I tried to convince myself still that it was just a lost guy, and his parking in an inconvenient way was merely an accident. Still though, I really didn't want to get out of the van and ask him to move. I began trying to come up with a plan. I pulled a little further toward the fence as if trying to make a U-turn. I already knew there wouldn't be enough room, but what he did next frightened me. As the nose of my van came right up against the fence, he pulled up further too at an angle, blocking me in completely. Now I knew he was up to no good, and now I could get a good look at him, as we were very close to each other. It was a man in a baseball cap with this crazy ZZ Top style beard. To give you the picture, I was in the right of the 2 lanes, with this crazy man blocking me completely to the left, and to my right being 3 cement pylons in the way, running the length of the lot with the car width in between them. Here's where I'll take a bow to the gods of dumb luck. I saw something in those pylons that most would not. You see, prior to this trip, I had spent a brief amount of time as a bus driver, much of which was spent training newer drivers than I. One of the maneuvers on the commercial driving test in my state is called the backwards serpentine. To pass, you have to back the bus through these 3 cones positioned in a straight line. Since the cones are only a bus width apart, not length, you must turn at exactly the right time to master this move. To my luck, it was very similar to the exact situation I was looking at right now, although doing it with cones is a little bit different than a solid cement block. If I crashed into that, I would certainly not be able to drive out of there. Who knows what this man had in mind? I floored it in reverse, keeping the maneuver I had taught so many others in my head. Keep in mind, driving tests are graded on accuracy, not speed, so this was the first time I'd ever had to do it so fast. By the time I'd made it around the 2nd pylon, the man seemed to realize what was happening. Because he had a big car though and was pushed up against the fence, it took him a few turns to start to get turned around. By then, I had completed the maneuver and took off right back down the road. He tried to follow, but there was no way to know if he was chasing me or fleeing. There was only one way in or out of this place. I was scared because I was still lost, and presumably this man knew the area well if he had picked this spot to wait for lost tourists. I was not out of the woods yet. Pumped full of adrenaline, I opened my window and screamed at the man, "You picked the wrong girl to play driving games with, motherfucker!" I then heard a tiny robotic voice respond. No results for driving games, motherfucker. I was confused for a minute, then remembered the useless navigator on my phone which I had discarded. It had been flung to the floor of my passenger side during the ordeal. I wasn't about to stop to grab it though, so I began screaming I-80 at the top of my lungs. Finally, the phone heard me properly and began to give me directions back to the highway. I drove around the area highways, stopping at gas stations to observe the other vehicles getting off at least a few times to make sure I was not followed. Luckily, it had been a pretty distinctive car, but I still did this for over an hour before I felt safe enough to finally camp out.